Okay, guys. You're doing such good work. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Really. There's someone I want to introduce you to. There's someone I want to introduce you to. Yeah. Okay, everyone. So does anyone want to share a couple of the words or a quick story that you experienced? And was there an aha from you about what inspired and motivated you and what those words were? You're smiling, so I just have to, you have joy, you look joyful to me.
All right.
Do you have the box? Where's the box? Yeah. Yeah, they're really, we just need more of them.
I told a quick story of coming into a college athletic program, a soccer program, where coming in and just being happy to be there, and our coach, who's a tremendous leader, really illustrated a much more audacious goal. Thanks, Kelly. And set the bar much higher that I think was eye-opening for all of us. That no, it wasn't just about tomorrow's practice. It was about, yes, we can win the conference, we can go to the Final Four, et cetera. It was quite inspiring.
Inspired.
Yeah, and I had trouble describing his leadership, and what Kelly nicely articulated is that, yeah, they were audacious goals, and there was a sense of fearlessness that pervaded the team, and I think that was beneficial through not just that season, but four. Never made it to the Final Four, but it's an amazing experience.
Awesome, thank you. That's a great story. In the back. Thank you.
Who's in the back?
So this reminds me of a story when one morning in my family was a 14-year-old girl or something like that, and we received a phone call from the fire department in Peru when I lived. And it was my dad, and the fire department was telling them that his factory, he had built for 25 years, was burned down. So I remember going early in the morning at dawn with my dad, and we saw the place. It was everything was burned down.
Wow.
Everything, no insurance, nothing. And I was like really worried about him, and like if he will throw the towel, if he will be in despair, anything. But he was just like so calm, and he said, "We've only lost material things." And I think like when I describe the leadership, it's like he knew so well his dream. He had a vision of being a successful entrepreneur, and nothing will stop him, and it didn't. So we just rebuilt over the years as a family, and it was wonderful to be part of that journey.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
And I guess we're going to start talking about all our stories, because now her story reminds me something that when I was 9 years old, I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be a ballerina. But I have never been very flexible. So there is the international, El IMBA, International School of Beautiful Arts in Mexico. And so when they do the auditions, everybody left all over here, and I can never do that. And I love so much. I wanted to be such ballerina for so long, and I just couldn't. So my mom went and dropped me off, and it was a couple of blocks from my house. And I come back, and I was like to my mom, well, I didn't make it. And she says, well, try again. And she says, go and talk to the teacher or the director, and I'll wait for you at home. And it's like, I'm gonna go by myself, you coming with me? And she says, who wants to be a ballerina? And I was like, me, I'm just, and that moment I didn't thought, I'm only 9 years old. I'm just telling my mom me, and she's my mom, well, so you go. So, and I'm gonna wait for you at home. I'll prepare something for you to eat. So I go to the director office. I told her that I failed the audition. And she says, oh, okay, well, there's another audition. Go ahead, try again. I did like 3 auditions, and I kept failing. Until it was like, okay, maybe you need to change the dance and go to folkloric dance. And finally, I make it, but I have to go to the director 3 times, feeling embarrassed, not knowing what to say, and I just keep trying. And I think that was a great lesson that my mom could have given me to not give up what I want.
What's a word you'd put on that?
Perseverance.
Perseverance. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Somebody else? Story or words? Commitment?
Yeah. Our group, all our stories kind of circled back to this concept of authenticity, and we found that our really positive leadership examples were people who had this genuine passion that was almost infectious.
Yes.
And you could really, we kind of circled on you can really sense when it's coming from an authentic place, and it's hard for that not to be infectious and contagious. And when it's coming from a place of authenticity, it really has a lot more power.
Absolutely. We know when someone's, we feel it, right? When someone's authentic, you can tell the difference. Thank you. Authenticity. Anybody else? How about some, back there, behind you?
Can I go?
Please, please.
And this is politics. So I had never run for office or never run for major office before, and I decided to run in Wyoming, as a lot of people here know, for U.S. Congress, U.S. House, out of the blue. And I was in, I think, Thermop, as everyone here knows it. And I was in front of a friendly audience. And someone got up, she was I think the movie theater owner maybe, and she asked me a question. And I thought I knew what she wanted to hear. So I started to say something that I thought was what she wanted to hear. And about 2 sentences in, this is like my first week of campaigning, I realized if I go there, I'm never going to go back. And I need to be authentic, right? And I need to tell her really the way I feel and my thoughts on this issue. And honestly, I can't remember specifically what I said. And I did. And it turned out that we didn't really agree. But at the end of the day, people know when you're authentic versus when you're trying to sell them a bill of goods. And it just informed everything I did from there on out. And it's like, win or lose, I was going to be authentic. And people smell that out, right? They
Absolutely.
may not be educated about issues, but they can tell. And that was such a great lesson for me early on that stayed with me forever.
I love that, Gary. It's fantastic. Thank you.
I'll just add an idea that goes along with Gary's story, and that is, for me, it was in the moment, like noticing things happening and in the moment and then acting on it. That's what inspiring leadership has been, that I've seen. And I would say Gary's example is kind of that way. In the moment, he knew, okay, wait a minute,
So
I need to be authentic.
Sorry to interrupt you. Are you saying you're kind of listening to your gut? Yes, listening to our gut. And sometimes too, in the lives we live, which are so busy and on the phones all the time, part of leadership too is be able to create space. You guys live in the most beautiful place in the world, to go out into your mountains and pass. I mean, it's incredible here to create space to be able to think and clear the clutter so that you can actually hear yourself and really start to trust your gut. Because there's a lot of lessons down there. We just don't listen to it sometimes. And how could you if you're on your phone 24/7? So the beauty of technology and actually the obstacles of technology. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Courage. Yeah. I think someone's going to be talking about courage today. I heard a rumor. So when you think about, when you did this exercise, did you realize or did you come across the concept that maybe I'm not so motivated by, let me go back if I can do this. We're not really motivated by data, are we? It doesn't really inspire us. I mean, it's interesting. And science and clarity and all that stuff is important, but what moves us is our heart. You know, when someone over here was talking about how do I motivate my employees, you motivate them by their hearts, what inspires us, what that feeling, that leadership creates a feeling inside ourselves. And that when people feel like you care. You know, I always hope that, but we talk a lot of concepts in the leadership field, right? There's concepts, but what I hope you walk away with is action steps. You know, action steps to reaching your heart and the hearts of the people around you. So like the things of like care, listening, you know, leadership in the old model of the head leadership was leaders were supposed to have all the answers. And in today's world, leaders are the ones that are willing to ask the questions. How can we do this differently? How can we keep our young people here in Jackson? You know, what do we need to do different about our housing? How do we ask the questions? No leader can understand and know all the answers. Mary Barra, who's the CEO of GM, and I've been following her career along, and she started as an administrative assistant all the way up to the CEO, and first woman to be a CEO of a big car company like that. Anyways, her whole model of leadership is listening. And tell me something I don't know. She walks her plants and talks to the guys and women on the front line and says, tell me something that you see that I need to know. What do you know that I don't know? All the answers come from your people, but you have to take time to go out and talk to them. And what happens is leaders get so busy, right? So how do you make time in your schedule to say, can I check in with you? How are you doing? What's going on in your life? What are you seeing that I should know about? Listening is a hugely, if we did nothing in leadership, we should be teaching listening skills. Authenticity, we've covered a lot today. Vulnerability, the willing to be open. You know, there's the young people, what the millennials have brought to us is how do I bring my whole person to work? And this whole, we always had our guard up all the time in the old leadership model. And I was doing some work with a company that was Salesforce.com, and their CEO of the Americas. We were talking about this whole thing of vulnerability and being open and bringing your whole person to work. He said, you know what's interesting? I think I cover, it's called covering. I cover. He said, when I go to my kids' baseball game, I tell everyone I have a meeting. And I'm covering up who I am. I'm a dad. And I go to my kids' games. And so part of vulnerability is letting people in on who you are. That's all Brene Brown's work. Powerful, powerful work. We connect to people when we have common experiences. If I don't share anything about myself, you know, Lynn and I had the most incredible connected conversation yesterday, and this is what we do as leaders and women about adoption. Like, we went right to adoption, and this whole thing about what we have in our common in our lives, and it was so powerful, right? And we just would have been like, well, what does your college do? What do you do for leadership? You know, no, we went to talk about adoption and life and family and illness and breast cancer, and that's like I get chills from our conversation, you know? So that's what, like how you as leaders become vulnerable and open and connected. Belonging, how do you know if your organization is working? You know, this whole thing about diversity, inclusion, we have a diverse workforce. So if you hire diverse people, inclusion is how do you make sure those people succeed? But how do you know that it's working? They feel like they belong and they feel safe. Okay, all of this is what brings, this is the full model. So you can't, if you just have the left side, important stuff, but this is what, when you have the intersection of the head and the heart, is the fully integrated leader. So head stuff is important, and that puts the purpose and strategy into your organization. But what gets your people to follow and join in on your passion, because what does a leader have to have? What do you have to have? Well, yeah, but you got to have followers, right? You got to have people who are following you with passion. What you want is inspired, passionate, committed, engaged followers. And so how do you get that? Their heart, through the heart. And that's been the missing link in leadership. That's been the piece. Why are companies having huge lack of engagement and lack of retention? Because they're all in the head. And so what's happening is the companies now are working with, how do we create head and heart cultures? Because the head, obviously, you have to have accountability and strategy and clarity. But that's one piece of the pie. So any thoughts about this? Questions? I'm going to call up my two panelists, Kristen Fox and Kris Shean. Come on up. Anyone have any thoughts as the panelists are coming up about this head and heart model? Does it make sense? Right? Missing piece. And sometimes as a leader, an integrated leader, sometimes you have to ask yourself, where am I? If you're strategic and thoughtful, how do I show up? Sometimes you're too much in the heart and you need to get into the head, and sometimes, oh, have a seat. Welcome. Super excited to have you guys here. Kris is the owner of Häagen-Dazs here. Little competition going on between Ben & Jerry's and Häagen-Dazs, right? For 25 years?
Yes.
Amazing. And Kristen is the new executive director of Momentum.
Momentum.
Did I say it right? Momentum. But former banker, and we'll talk about that. So right here in the community, two amazing leaders. And so I just wanted to kind of have a conversation about, how did this head and heart resonate? And for you, leading for 25 years in a store with lots of different workers, how have you found the kind of the head and heart concept in your leadership?
I have, well, I'm going to say I've evolved as a leader. In the beginning, I was scared, I was nervous, I was questioning what I was doing. Wasn't always the best employer and was on the head side. The money, how am I going to pay my bills, the bottom line, the over-scooping of ice cream, how much my ice cream my employees are eating, or
The
and
samples,
then,
how many too many samples?
right, samples. And I hope, and I'd like to say that I've evolved into more of a leader of compassion, understanding, trying to get to know my employees better. I noticed a huge change in just the atmosphere of my store. I used to just walk in and I could see so many things that weren't right. And I would immediately try to address that, and I'm sure my staff at that time was like hating me, frustrated, and I noticed this shift, especially with this one gal who worked for me one summer, and if I paid attention to her, said hello, how are you, how's your day, her whole attitude was much better. She had some other things going on, but I just really, that just hit me. There was an aha of like, wow, okay, so what happens if I pay attention and talk to everybody, and how's your day, or do you like this job? Do you like what you're doing? Has really made a huge shift, I feel, in my business.
Yeah.
And that concern, and it's pretty powerful.
Was there a pivotal moment when you realized, wow, I really should lead maybe a little bit differently because you weren't getting what you wanted?
We had a national meeting. It was in 2014. So after the recession, I had really questioned what I was doing. My business wasn't great. I'm like, what am I doing? And that kind of kicked me in the butt as far as to motivate me to be better myself and to work with my staff in a different way that was more positive.
And did you find that once you changed the way you were leading from more of a positive kind of heart-based, that the profits, that impacted the profits in what way?
It just became easier. And because I shifted my way of how I interacted with my staff and found a different purpose of from the head to the heart. That shift, I think, is what really helped. And realizing that these are people, they're not just somebody working for me, but they have problems. And I have found myself being more vulnerable too with my staff. And a couple years ago, I was I applied for Leadership Wyoming, which is a ridiculously amazing program, and it's kind of a big deal to get into that. And there were 4 or 5 days each month that I had to be gone for this, and I wanted to be gone to it, but I let my staff know how important it was for me to have that time off, and for them, they couldn't have the time off, they had to work. And I realized that once I shared why it was so important to me, how much more willing they were to step up. And I think that's a good part in leadership, is giving them the opportunity to shine, so to speak.
Right. Right, that's fantastic. And that's really what leadership is, right? How do your people shine as human beings under your leadership? And that's the new work of Tom Peters, who's one of the greats in leadership. He wrote a book in 1982 called, and thank you, In Search of Excellence. Flash forward, his newest book is Radical Humanism. And he says that as leaders, we should be held accountable for the experience that our employees have, and after they don't work for you anymore or they go on to something else, are they a better human being, a better leader because they knew you?
My goal always with any employee is, I feel I've achieved if I can, what I like to say, turn the light bulb on, and they get that aha moment or something that I have said to them or that they've picked up from working for me will transfer into their lives.
But you have a lot of young people.
I do.
Yes.
My core summer employees are high schoolers.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a young, vulnerable age to where you can have a lot of impact as a leader.
I hope so.
Right? You know?
I hope so. And I should maybe check in with them, or even it never occurred to me to ask them how in what ways I've maybe helped them.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting.
And once you do that for a while, and they start, because at first they're like, what? And then they start, once you do it on a regular basis, you start to open up this kind of this open dialogue, right? Well, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen, so you've had a big change. You've just started your new job. You were on the board before, but before you had a banking business career in banking here. So you've had some changes with that bank. And so share a little bit about your leadership journey, and then how you kind of decided to take the reins of momentum. I will get that.
For sure. Yes, so I had been in banking for about 13 years before making a big pivot into the nonprofit world. And I'm happy to see that my predecessor is here today. And that was a big change. I initially got into banking when I needed a real job in Jackson. That's quite literally how it started. And did well. I can remember my first management position, as management tends to find you. You're good at what you do, and so they promote you and say, oh, be a manager, and you have no idea actually how to do that. So there was a lot of failure along the way, but I too like to think that I'm curious, and tried to learn from some of those missteps. And I had the good fortune of taking a class with Sandy and Liza on personal leadership and foundations of leadership, and so some of these concepts were planted in my mind after that. But I really didn't realize how that was going to come to play out until I found myself in the last few months of my banking job with First Republic. And as some of you may know, it was an interesting time. Silicon Valley Bank had just failed, and the focus quickly shifted to my bank. And so we were facing really a crisis. People were panicked. They didn't know what was going to happen, and so they needed to figure out how to protect their assets, whether it was the inheritance that their children would eventually get, if they were a fiduciary for funds, or a business that needed to pay their employees and their bills. And we had all of the facts and figures, right, to try to address that situation as best as possible. We were all quickly skilled in learning how to calculate FDIC insurance and how to talk to our clients about how we could help. And what I quickly realized, though, was that me and my colleagues were facing our own crisis. We didn't know if we were going to have a job in a few months. We didn't know if this career that we'd been working so hard to build was crumbling before our eyes, because that's how it truly felt. And I started to pivot to really leaning into my colleagues and supporting them, because what I realized wasn't being acknowledged was all of that. And so that was the listening and the authenticity. I was scared too. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was probably the newest employee, and my career was not going to go down this long path that I thought originally when I started. So that was my experience, was that even though the story didn't end well for me or my former employer the way that I'd hoped, I felt proud of the work that I'd been able to do, really listening to my colleagues, understanding what they were showing up with each day and the battles they were fighting. And I really saw the benefit of that, because I could create a space where people could be their authentic selves and acknowledging some of the fear and uncertainty.
And then also with the clients that were all of a sudden dealing with the crisis of the bank, we had talked about kind of how that made a difference to really get to know the clients as well.
It did, because again, we were armed with all of these facts and figures and ways that we were going to try to salvage the deposits that were quickly running. And what I realized too is when I was having those conversations, somebody was worried about their life savings. It didn't matter if I was skilled at, talking about FDIC insurance or, facts about the bank. I needed to acknowledge what they were showing up with me, that fear and that uncertainty. And I had to assure them that I was their advocate, that I was really gonna make decisions in their best interest. So again, I wasn't sure where that was gonna lead, but I think one thing that I've learned is that it's these tough moments where you really have to understand your values and why you're doing the things you're doing.
Right. And so that's led you to this new opportunity, but you'd also talked about mentorship in your life, which has kind of led you to this organization that mentors. So share kind of that journey for you, leader as mentor, right? So that is a huge piece of leadership, is how we mentor and guide the people around us. So tell us about that journey you've had.
Absolutely. So you had said, who gets to come to this conference? I'm not a leader. And that's something that's very common with our organization, is women often don't think of themselves as being leaders or even being capable of mentorship. And I love being able to just break it down into a very small level, 5-minute mentor session, because that's really all that it is. And I think anybody who's been through a difficult situation and has had to dig deep and really figure out how they're gonna, become a dancer or whatever the case may be, right? Something is worth fighting for. You are a leader and you embody those qualities. So we spend a lot of time, Kris is on the Momentum board, and we spend a lot of time trying to recruit women to our program and having those very conversations about why it is time for them to step into their leadership.
So, and then tell us a little bit about the programs that you have that you're going to be now leading on mentorship.
Absolutely. So we have just kicked off our 9-month-long cohort program. It is the signature of our organization, and it's a group of 30 women total who will be paired up as mentors and mentees on a journey together. And it's not necessarily scripted. They get to kind of define what they're going to get out of the program with our guidance. We have some amazing alumni in our community who also provide support. And then we also do public workshops, and we have our own leadership event as well coming up this November.
Great. So how about mentorship when you think about your leadership with your young people? How does mentorship fit into that kind of leadership style that you've now stepped into?
I have a store manager, and she's young, and there's been lots of opportunities in especially the last couple years, where I'm hoping that just directing her, and she has a tendency, I think, to be a little harsh, and I saw her in me 20 years ago, and I know from experience how detrimental that can be to the organization. And so we'll have conversations afterwards of how maybe that could have gone differently. So I think that's how I'm hopefully mentoring her and sharing with her why I do things the way I have to do, why I do things the way I feel it needs to be done. And some of it is because I am a franchise. There are things that we have to do in order to protect the brand. Where is Matt? Is he? There is. Yeah, he's probably either nodding his head or shaking his head. And so there's things in my shop that that's the way they have to be done. And with her, I'm hoping that she's also taking from me the why it's important to get the people to do it that way. You can't just bark at them. And I caught myself the other day with a key employee who I have repetitively asked her to do something, and I lost it almost. And it wasn't cool, and I still owe her an apology. And I don't like myself when I'm that way. And so I'm in hopes that I can instill these values in Claudia, who's my manager, of learning from me. And there's definitely things that she's got to figure out for herself and find her own voice, which is also important.
I love what you just said, though, because we make mistakes as leaders. You know, we skin our knees, we get upset, we're having a bad day. But to be able to go back and say, I'm sorry I acted like that, that's not the culture, you know, that we're trying to have here. And I make mistakes too. That's vulnerability, right? That's authenticity, being willing to say that and create safety in an organization. So and the fact that you are vulnerable even enough to share that story on stage says a lot about you.
Thank you.
Yeah, because those are, right? Because we want to show up like, oh, we have it all together. And you find out, you know, I think Nick was saying, like, everybody struggles. I don't care how high someone is and what you think they're at, but everybody struggles with our internal conversations and how we show up and the mistakes we make. And so it's only the willingness as leaders to talk about this stuff that then gives other people permission to also then talk about mistakes.
Those conversations always sound so much better in my head.
So true. So touch on safety and belonging. When you think about, you know, when we look at the heart qualities, and how do you create an environment where it's safe and people feel like they belong?
That really it resonated with me quite a bit. I have 5 key employees right now.
Can you guys hear?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not used to a microphone. And one is, my manager's El Salvadorian. I have a Bulgarian, a gal from Turkey, I have a Jamaican, and then there's a gentleman who's my age who is a little more on the old school side sometimes, and I always wonder how he feels with the rest of the staff. But they all really get along, and I guess I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit. A couple weeks ago, closed the store for the day, and I took all 5 of them up to the park and hiked up to, they wanted to go to Delta Lake, and I'm like, oh boy. Those of you who have done it, it's not an easy hike. And I was like, all right, this is what we're doing. So I closed the store for the day, and they all, throughout the day, switching, you know, they just happened to like switch with who they were kind of walking with and the conversations that were happening. And we ended the day at Dornan's, and they were just also appreciative, but I've noticed a change in the store of who's working together, of having different conversations and not maybe just talking about that crazy customer that was just in. And I'm finding having more real conversations because we spent that time together and got to know each other better. So that's where you can have those real conversations. And the gal from Turkey she was a little quieter before we did this trip, and now she feels, I'd like to think she feels more a part of the team. And I wish I could have these 5 forever now because of the relationship they've built.
Right. Yeah. This is such a great example, right? It's because this is we're humans. This is humanity. This is leadership is a human business, sport. whatever we want to call it, but it's about getting to know each other and loving on each other and being supportive of each other. And that's really, and that, then you have more engaged employees that want to be there, and then that turns into more profit. This model is how you get profit. It's, as Jim said yesterday, it's one story. It's not profit versus being kind or with your people. It's one story. It's how we do business, that people matter. And that's the new leadership model. I shouldn't say so new. There have been people that have been practicing this for a really long time. But that's where we see results and change, and we have impact on humanity.
And you just mentioned too engagement, which I think as an employer, how do I engage my employees? And on the flip side of that, as an employee, how are you engaged in your work? And are you advocating for yourself if there's a project coming online that you really want to do? Are you given that opportunity? And just as an example, Kristen said that I'm the newest board member in Momentum, which I'm so excited for. And we had our first cohort meeting last week where they got to meet, the mentees and mentors got to meet each other and find out who was paired. And it was such an amazing meeting, and I had already said, well, I would love to be on the alumni committee. And I'm like changing myself, thinking, and I'm like, I want to make this magic happen, and I want to be part of the selection committee of who gets paired together, because that evening of the excitement and these women and who the committee put together, I can't wait for the next 9 months to see what happens. It's really cool.
But the energy, right? You know, someone said, how do you know you're doing the right thing in your life with passion? You have the purpose and passion. You have the energy. When you have energy for something, don't you just feel the energy coming off of, right? It's like, so that's what we're talking about here. So, Kristen, talk about safety or belonging and experience that you've kind of had in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just go back to, again, my prior banking career. That psychological safety, right, is that do you have someone else's best interest in mind? And how are you conveying that, right? And
Yes.
Kris is an employer, an amazing employer. She's telling her employees that she cares about them because she's willing to close the shop and sacrifice the profits for a full day to take them on an experience, right? And even following up later on to say, you know, how are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing now? So that's kind of how I think about it too, is how can I convey to someone that I care about their interests. This is not just about what I'm getting out of the situation. I think that's the essence of human relationships. That's the essence of trust. And for someone to trust a leader, they do need to feel like they belong, but they also need to understand from that leader that you will advocate for them, that you do have their best interests, their growth, their values, even their family, right? What's going on in their world. And again, that's what I realized when I was dealing with a really stressful situation in the banking world, even though we had done well, to your point, after COVID, it was tough. And I just knew that the way that I could keep showing up and not completely dreading things was how can I support? And so I would like to think that I created a little bit of psychological safety for my colleagues, knowing that they didn't have to hide from Kristen when they came around the corner. Yeah.
So I think we are out of time, aren't we? So you guys, thank you so much. This is really, really... And I just want to leave you with one thing to say, you know, that this work of the head and heart leader is that you have to be strategic and intentional and make time for listening and care and do it in your own unique way. Everyone has their own way of doing it, but how are you connecting with your employees? How are you in whatever your life, your family, your volunteer work, your business life, how are you creating a place where people can be their whole selves and flourish in your energy and your aura and your leadership? So thank you for listening, and I hope you all, as you solve the problems of Jackson, that you'll become head and heart leaders, but I think a lot of you already are. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. You guys are great. So I just want one quick story because it's a lot of women out there. And Colby Cox, who runs Convergence and runs Roadhouse Brewery, they are a sponsor here, and they're at some beer fest this weekend, so they couldn't be here. Maybe we should all be there. But you know, the amazing story he told on that is Roadhouse Brewing, right? What's our biggest issue in the summer if you're an employer? What is it? Come on. Staffing, right? Turnover. Roadhouse Brewing has had one person leave, and that was last month in 2 years. Okay? So he builds his companies not with 2 stories, with 1 story. And the piece that we're pulling together on all of these from these companies is to change the culture and the, you know, kind of what we believe to be true, that we have to have these 2 stories, that all of us here, you know, the 200 and 250 people that have come in, if we all do it, whether we're leaders of JP Morgan or we just have this new idea because I just graduated from high school, if we go out in the world this way and say we're holding true to it, and it doesn't mean it's always easy, we can have all the ripple effects of that. And we have lots of employers here. Steve Sullivan and his team with Stio, you know, they wanted to be here, and they're at some outdoor retailer. Kelly Jones is flying back right now early from it, so she can speak this afternoon. But those are the people who are changing the game, and they're making money and growth, and they're economically sustainable while they have 1 story. And they're looking at people, as Jim said, not as here's the objects or widgets in my model to make it work, but these are human beings, and I can look at you and say, how am I? And in all our leadership work, when people come in and they say, I have all these issues, and one day I said, well, just take in 2 cups of coffee every morning for the next month and ask your 2 people who are having issues, just don't even talk about the business. Bring in coffee and say, let's just talk about life. And by the end of that month, he's like, oh my God, it's so different in our work. And I'm like, duh, right? But we forget that. So, but we also need to eat, and I'm really excited to say it is a frickin' beautiful day out there. There are lunch boxes, or there's lunch out there, and there's a tent outside with tables. So go for a walk, go eat, go be merry, have fun, and we will begin again at 1:30 with some really cool magical storytelling on all of this, and then we'll hear from the Ben & Jerry's Magic Maker. It's the ice cream day. And we will then be on our way at 4 o'clock. So thank you so much, and go have a good lunch.